Elliot Granger was 43 years old, and he had spent the last 14 months sleeping in the guest bedroom of his own house without once being asked to leave the master. Nobody had drawn that line. Nobody had said the words. He had simply stopped going back one night after a fight about nothing, a grocery receipt of all things, and neither of them had acknowledged the shift. That was how things ended in the Granger household. Not with declarations, but with quiet rearrangements that nobody named out loud. On a Thursday evening in early November, sitting in his parked car in the driveway of their brownstone in Lincoln Park, Chicago, with the engine off and the windows fogging from his breath, he held his phone and stared at a text from his divorce attorney. Documents ready for review. Let me know when you'd like to come in and sign. 11 words. Clinical. Final. The period at the end of a sentence he had been composing in his head for over a year. He should have felt something. Relief, maybe. Or grief. Or at the very least the dull satisfaction of a decision finally made. Instead, what he felt was the particular numbness of a man who has rehearsed an ending so many times that when it arrives, it no longer registers as real. He turned the phone face down on his lap and looked at the house through the windshield. The kitchen light was on. Second floor, the reading lamp in the living room. Warm amber squares against cold brick. Nadira was home. She was always home by 6:30 on Thursdays. He knew her schedule the way a person knows a route they have driven 10,000 times. By feel, by muscle memory, by the accumulated weight of years spent paying attention to someone without telling them so. What Elliot did not know, what he could not have predicted sitting in that fogging car with an attorney's text glowing on his phone, was that in less than 48 hours, he would hear his wife say something to a stranger that would crack him open entirely. And then he would have to decide, with no time to prepare and no room to perform, whether he was the man she described or the man he had been pretending to be. Before this story goes any further, if you have ever loved someone so carefully that they mistook your steadiness for absence, stay with me. Chicago in November has a specific kind of beauty that most people miss because they are too busy bracing against the cold. The lake turns steel gray. The wind sharpens. The trees along the magnificent miles stand bare and honest, stripped of everything decorative, showing only what is structurally sound. Elliot noticed these things. He was an architect. Noticing structure was not just his profession. It was the lens through which he understood the world. He was a senior project lead at Kessler Plus Park, a mid-sized firm on West Randolph that specialized in adaptive reuse, turning old warehouses and abandoned schools into living spaces. 14 years at the firm. The kind of architect who spent more time on site than at his desk, who could run his hand along a 100-year-old wall and tell you where the original structure ended and the later additions began. He understood layers. He understood what held and what only appeared to, what psychology would call hypervigilance in a professional context, the compulsive need to scan for structural failure. Elliot had developed long before architecture school. He was the oldest of 4 children raised by a single mother in Bronzeville who worked double shifts at Rush Hospital. He had learned early that the person who notices the problem first is the person responsible for fixing it. He carried that into his marriage the way some men carry old injuries, invisibly and at great personal cost. His wife, Nadira Okafor Granger, was 40, a pediatric speech therapist with the kind of warmth that made nervous children relax within minutes of meeting her. She had a gap between her front teeth that she had considered closing once and then decided against because, she said, it was the first thing Elliot had told her he loved. That was 11 years ago. At a friend's birthday dinner in Wicker Park. She had been telling a story about a kid in her practice who had said his first complete sentence that week, and her whole face had opened with a kind of unguarded joy that made Elliot set his fork down and simply watch. For 8 of their 11 years, that openness had been the defining quality of their marriage. The last 2.5 had been different, not hostile, not cold exactly, something more clinical than that. The way 2 people who work in helping professions can become very skilled at managing each other's emotions without ever actually feeling them. It had started, if Elliot was honest with himself, around the time his mother's health declined. Ruth Granger's stroke had come without warning 2.5 years ago, on a Sunday afternoon while she was watering her garden. Elliot had driven to the hospital still wearing his weekend clothes, paint on his hands from a bathroom renovation he would never finish. He had sat in the ICU waiting room for 9 hours. Nadira had come, sat beside him, held his hand. But something in him had closed that night and stayed closed. Psychologists call it emotional foreclosure, the premature shutting down of grief before it can be fully processed. Elliot would not have used that term. He would have said he handled it. He managed. He arranged his mother's transfer to a rehabilitation facility, coordinated her care with his 3 younger siblings, and went back to work the following Monday. He did not cry. He did not ask for time. He did what he had always done. He identified the structural problem, developed a plan, and executed it. What he did not do was tell Nadira what it cost him, and Nadira, trained by profession and disposition to wait for language to arrive on its own, had waited. She had not pushed. She had given him room, the way she gave her small patients room to find their words. She had made his coffee in the morning without being asked. She had kept the house running without complaint. She had waited for him to come back to her, and the longer he didn't, the more she read his absence as an answer. The driveway was getting cold. Elliot picked up the phone, read the attorney's text one more time, and typed, "Monday works. Morning." He hit send before he could reconsider, then sat in the stillness that followed. One more weekend, he thought. One more weekend of this half-life before it becomes official. He got out of the car. Inside, Nadira was standing at the kitchen counter, chopping bell peppers with the precise, even strokes of someone whose hands are busy, but whose mind is somewhere else entirely. She glanced up when he came in. "There's leftover pasta in the fridge." "Thanks." That was it. The complete text of their Thursday evening exchange. 2 sentences. No hostility. No warmth. No edges of any kind. Just logistics. The language of 2 people who have replaced intimacy with efficiency and are no longer sure how to reverse the trade. He ate the pasta standing at the counter because sitting at the table felt like it would require a kind of commitment he was not prepared to make, even to a chair. Nadira finished her chopping, covered the cutting board, wiped the counter, and moved to the staircase. At the bottom step she paused, her back to him. Dr. Achibe's office called. They moved Mom Ruth's appointment to Saturday morning. "I told them you'd take her. I'll be there." She went upstairs. He listened to her footsteps cross the ceiling above him, the creak of the bedroom door, the soft thud of it closing. If your wife took care of your mother's medical appointments, even as your marriage was falling apart, would that tell you something? Or would you miss the message entirely? Drop your answer in the comments. Stay with me. Saturday morning came with the particular gray stillness that November gives Chicago, the sky low enough to touch, the lake invisible behind a wall of mist, the whole city wrapped in a quietness that felt less like peace and more like the held breath before something shifts. Elliot picked up his mother from the rehabilitation center at 8:15. Ruth Granger was 71, sharp-eyed despite the stroke's damage, and entirely uninterested in the careful optimism her doctors performed during appointments. She watched everything with the particular attention of a woman who had raised 4 children alone and could identify pretense from across a room. After the appointment, which went well enough, slight improvement in her left-hand grip, continued speech exercises, Elliot drove her back and got her settled. At the door, she took his wrist with her good hand and held it with surprising firmness. "That girl still there?" she asked. Meaning Nadira. "She's there, Ma. You still sleeping in that other room?" He didn't answer. Ruth studied his face with the forensic patience of a mother who has been reading her children's evasions for 4 decades. "You know what your problem is, Elliot. You fix everything except the thing you're standing in." He kissed her forehead and left. The thing about his mother's observations, the reason they landed with the particular weight they did, was that they were structurally sound. She identified the load-bearing issue and stated it without embellishment. "You fix everything except the thing you're standing in." He turned it over in his mind as he drove back across the city, past the skeleton of a building he had worked on 2 years ago, now a thriving restaurant on the ground floor with apartments above, past the old firehouse his team had converted into an art gallery. Evidence, everywhere he looked, that he knew how to take broken things and make them whole again. Everywhere except at 2847 North Racine Avenue, where his own marriage sat like a building with a shifting foundation that he inspected daily and never repaired, he was supposed to go home. Instead, he drove to his office and sat at his drafting table and did nothing productive for 2 hours. What he was doing, though he would not have described it this way, was what clinical psychologists call anticipatory grief, mourning a loss before it has technically occurred. He was pre-grieving his marriage the way some people pre-grieve a terminal diagnosis, adjusting to the absence before the absence is complete. At 11:40, his phone buzzed. A text from Nadira. Amar's having a small thing at her place tonight. Dinner. You should come. Amara was Nadira's closest friend, a labor and delivery nurse at Northwestern Memorial with a loud laugh and an apartment in Uptown that always smelled like something West African and extraordinary. Under normal circumstances, Elliot would have declined. He had been declining social invitations with quiet consistency for months, the way a man withdraws from rooms where he might be required to perform a version of himself he no longer believes in. But something about the text, maybe its brevity, maybe its timing on a day when he had already confirmed a Monday appointment to sign divorce papers, made him type "okay" and hit send before the reflex to decline could take hold. He did not know it yet, but that single word would change the trajectory of everything that followed. Because what happened at Amara's apartment that night would strip away every assumption he had built about his wife, his marriage, and his own capacity to be reached. Amara Osei's apartment was on the third floor of a walk-up on West Argyle. Narrow staircase, the smell of jollof rice and plantain meeting them 2 flights down. Music playing, something with a slow bass line and a woman's voice that sounded like it was being careful with something fragile. There were 8 people total, 4 couples, including Elliot and Nadira, though calling them a couple at this stage required a generosity of language that neither of them would have extended privately. They sat beside each other on Amara's sectional because the seating arrangement demanded it, and because sitting apart would have required an explanation that neither was prepared to offer. Elliot made the appropriate sounds. He complimented the food. He laughed at the right moments, usually a half-second late. The delay of a man who was present in body and running calculations in his head. He asked Amara's husband, Kweku, about his contracting business. He answered a question about a renovation project in Pilsen. He performed the version of himself that social settings required. What he watched, with the particular alertness that was both his gift and his affliction, was Nadira. She had dressed carefully. A dark green blouse he recognized. She had bought it for their anniversary dinner 3 years ago. The small gold hoops he had given her for her 37th birthday. Details that spoke to effort, to intention, to something she was trying to say with fabric and metal because words had failed her. But her eyes were somewhere else. She smiled, but the smiles arrived late, like delayed translations of emotions that had already passed. She held her wine glass with both hands, the way people hold warm things when they are cold inside. She ate almost nothing. At 9:15, Amara announced that she needed help with dessert in the kitchen and looked directly at Nadira. The look carried the specific freight of a friend who has been waiting for the right moment to have a conversation that is not about dessert. Nadira set her wine down and followed Amara through the swinging kitchen door. Elliot excused himself to the bathroom at 9:20. He walked down the short hallway that connected the living room to the back of the apartment. The bathroom was the last door. The kitchen was the second. The kitchen door was not fully closed. He heard Nadira's voice first, and his feet stopped moving before his brain could issue the instruction to keep walking. She was crying. Not the performative crying that some people do when they want to be heard. The other kind. The private, structural kind. The sound a person makes when something they have been holding in place for too long finally gives way under its own weight. Amara's voice came first, low and steady. "Talk to me, Dee. Talk to me." A long, shuddering breath. Then Nadira spoke. "He's the only man who has ever made me feel like I wasn't too much." Elliot's hand found the wall. Every man before Elliot, every single one, made me feel like I needed to be smaller, quieter, less. And Elliot never did that. Not once. He let me fill every room we walked into, and he stood beside me like that was exactly where he wanted to be. She stopped. The sound of her breathing, ragged and uneven, filled the hallway, and I lost him, not to someone else, not to anything dramatic. I lost him to the same thing I lose all my patients' parents to the silence that grows when people stop naming what they feel. And I'm a speech therapist, Amara. My entire career is built on helping people find words, and I couldn't find any for my own husband. The specific irony of that, a professional whose life's work was language, rendered wordless in her most important relationship, was not lost on Elliot. What psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the distress of holding contradictory truths simultaneously, hit him with physical force. He pressed his back against the hallway wall. Amara asked, gently, "Have you told him any of this?" "How? How do I say I love you and I'm terrified you've already left to a man who stopped looking at me like I was in the room? Did he stop? Or did you stop being able to see it?" A silence. Then, quieter, "I don't know anymore." That's the honest answer. "I don't know." Another pause. Elliot could hear Amara moving, the sound of a chair being pulled closer. The particular geography of female friendship, closing physical distance to make emotional distance crossable. "There's something else," Nadira said. Her voice dropped. "Marcus Webb, from the hospital fundraiser last month. He's been texting me." Elliot's jaw tightened. He knew Marcus Webb, vaguely, an investment consultant who appeared at charity events with the polished confidence of a man whose primary talent was identifying vulnerability and positioning himself as the remedy, the kind of man who carried business cards to funerals. "He keeps telling me I'm settling, that I'm too dynamic for a man who comes home and disappears into blueprints. He said I should explore my options." Amara's voice sharpened. "And what did you say?" "I said nothing. I didn't respond, but I read them. All of them. And the fact that I read them, Amara, the fact that I didn't block him immediately, what does that tell you about where I am? It tells me you're lonely, Dee. Not unfaithful. Lonely." Nadira's next words came out barely above a whisper. "Elliot redesigned the entire children's wing of that community center in Englewood last year. Pro bono. 40 families. He spent 11 months on it. He drove out there on weekends in January when it was -10 degrees. And he never once came home and told me about it. I found out from his colleague at a dinner party. A stranger told me my husband was building something extraordinary, and he never thought to mention it." She exhaled, the long, unsteady breath of a woman who has been carrying something alone for too long. "That's who he is. He builds things for people he'll never meet and forgets to tell the person sleeping in the next room. And I can't decide if that makes me love him more or break my heart." In the hallway, Elliot closed his eyes. He had not told her about the Englewood project because he had not thought it was remarkable. He had done it because a community organizer he respected had asked, because the existing space was failing structurally and functionally, because he could see in his mind what it should be, and so he built it. That was who he was. He built things that needed building. He just never occurred to him that the building itself was a form of communication, that his wife might need to hear him say, in plain language, "This is what I care about, this is what I give my time to, and you are the reason I have the capacity to give it." He walked to the bathroom, closed the door, ran the water, stared at his own face in the mirror for a long time. A man who could read the structural history of a building at a glance, who could identify a crack in a foundation wall from 20 feet, and who had somehow missed every signal his wife had been sending for 2.5 years. What had his mother said that morning? "You fix everything except the thing you're standing in." He dried his hands, returned to the living room, and spent the remaining 45 minutes of the evening in a state of complete internal reconfiguration. Every assumption he had carried into that apartment, that Nadira had withdrawn first, that her silence was indifference, that the distance between them was evidence of her departure, was collapsing. And in its place, something more painful and more honest was emerging. The recognition that they had been building the same wall from opposite sides, each convinced the other had laid the first brick. They drove home in silence. Lakeshore Drive at night. the city passing in streaks of amber and white, the lake a dark absence on the right. Nadira looked out the passenger window. Elliot watched the road. But inside, he was doing what he always did with failing structures, tracing the problem backward to its origin point, cataloging every missed signal. His mother's stroke. The months of emotional shutdown that followed. Nadira's Friday evening meals that he had eaten gratefully and silently, returning to his drafting table without ever telling her that those meals were sometimes the only gentle thing in his entire week. The weekend in Michigan she had suggested last spring that he had declined without explanation because he was managing a site emergency he never mentioned. Small withdrawals, each one invisible on its own. Stacked together over 30 months, they had become a wall. When they got home, Nadira went to the living room. Her couch, her space. Elliot stood in the kitchen and looked at the attorney's text still on his phone. Monday morning. 2 days. He poured a glass of water and didn't drink it. He set the glass on the counter and walked to the living room door. He knocked. Not loud, not tentative. The knock of a man who has made a decision and does not yet know if it is welcome, but has decided that the not knowing is no longer a sufficient reason to remain silent. Footsteps. The door opened. Nadira stood in the doorway in an old Northwestern sweatshirt, her hair wrapped, her eyes carrying the evidence of a woman who had been crying quietly and alone. She looked at him with the unsteady expression of someone encountering something they had stopped expecting. "Can we talk?" he said. She stepped back. He sat on the edge of the couch, her couch, kept a deliberate distance, hands clasped between his knees. "I heard you tonight," he said. At Amara's, the kitchen door was open. The color left her face in stages. "I wasn't trying to listen, but I heard." She pressed her hand to her mouth. Her eyes filled. "Before you say anything," he continued, his voice rough at the edges, the way a voice gets when a man has been holding something at chest level for years, "I need to tell you something. I've had a meeting scheduled with the divorce attorney for Monday morning." The tears came. Silent, continuous. They looked at each other across the small distance of a couch that had become the geography of their entire separation, and something that had been sealed for 2.5 years cracked open. Not violently, with the controlled release of pressure that happens when a structure finally breathes after being loaded beyond its design capacity. "I thought you were done," he said. "I thought you had looked at what we became and decided it wasn't enough." "I thought you left me a year ago," she answered. "I thought you moved into that room because you were practicing for the real thing, for actually leaving. I moved into that room because I didn't know how to be in the same space with you and not be able to reach you." She closed her eyes. "Your mother," she said softly. "After Ruth's stroke. You closed a door and I heard it lock, and I kept waiting outside it because that's what I do. I wait for people to find their words, but you never came back out." "I didn't know I had closed it," he said. And the truth of that, the genuine, structural truth, settled between them like a diagnosis that is devastating and clarifying in equal measure. He had not known. That was not an excuse. It was a fact. He had shut down so completely that he had lost awareness of the shutting. "Elliot," she said, "I kept every single note you ever wrote me, every birthday card, every sticky note you left on the coffee maker. They're in a box in the closet of this room." Something moved in his chest. "The green blouse tonight," she continued. "That was our anniversary blouse. I wore it because I wanted to see if you would notice. I noticed. You didn't say anything. I didn't know I was still allowed to. That landed. She let it stay. A moment passed. Then Nadira stood and crossed to the closet. She returned with a shoebox. Ordinary, unremarkable. The kind that holds running shoes. She opened it between them. His handwriting. Younger. Looser. The penmanship of a man in his early 30s who had not yet learned to be careful with language because it still came naturally. Notes from year 1, year 2, year 3. A birthday card that said nothing extraordinary. Just, "I'm glad you exist." That's the whole card. A sticky note from a random Tuesday. "You laughed in your sleep last night and it was the best sound in the house." He picked up the sticky note and stared at it. "When did I stop?" he asked, not as an accusation, as genuine grief. "Gradually," she said, "the way everything happens. Gradually, and then all at once." "Why didn't we just say something?" Her answer was quiet and precise, the answer of a woman who has turned the question over 10,000 times. "Because I was too proud to say I miss you to a man I was still married to." It felt like admitting failure. "And I think you were too." He nodded. That was exactly right. An architect who could identify a structural failure in any building except his own. A speech therapist who helped children find words for a living and could not find them for her husband. Two professionals whose expertise had become the exact shape of their blind spots. "Marcus Webb," Elliot said, not with anger, with the measured attention of a man assessing a variable. "I need to know." I never responded. Not once. But I didn't block him either, and that bothered me more than anything he said, because it meant I was keeping a door open, even if I never planned to walk through it. Why? Because hearing someone say, "You're worth more," even someone I didn't respect, was the only version of being seen I was getting. That landed squarely. He sat with it. It deserved sitting with. "I should have been the one saying it," he said. "Every day. Out loud. Not in my head." Yes. The silence that followed was different from every silence that had preceded it. Not hollow, not defensive. Charged. The way air feels before weather changes. "I don't want to go to that meeting on Monday," Elliot said. "I don't want you to go either. Then we do this for real, not just an agreement to try harder. Real work. A therapist. Honest conversations. The kind where we say the thing before the silence has time to fill the space." She searched his face. The old habit of checking whether he meant something before she allowed herself to believe it. What attachment theorists call earned security. The hard-won trust that comes not from consistency alone, but from consistency after rupture. She was looking for evidence that this rupture had changed the structure, not just patched the surface. He held her gaze and gave her the time. "Okay," she said. Not flat, not performed, a real one. They talked until 2 in the morning, about year 9, about year 10, about Ruth's stroke and the months that followed, months that Elliot had experienced as a controlled emergency and Nadira had experienced as a slow disappearance. But the Englewood project, and the Michigan trip and the Friday evening meals and every small thing that had gone unnamed until the accumulation became impassable. When he finally stood, Nadira reached out and caught his hand briefly. A gesture so small it could have been accidental. It wasn't. He squeezed once, let go. But their first session with a therapist would surface something Elliot had been carrying alone for months. Something that would test the foundation they were trying to rebuild in ways neither of them expected. Dr. Dead, Camille Weston's office, was in a converted Victorian and Old Town. The kind of building Elliot instinctively respected. Original bones, thoughtful renovation, nothing wasted. Her bookshelves ran floor to ceiling and the room smelled like lemongrass and old paper. She was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked locks and the unhurried patience of someone who had long ago stopped being impressed by polished half-truths. She waited the way experienced therapists wait, without pressure, without prompting, until the real thing arrived on its own. "Tell me what went wrong," she said simply. Nadira went first. She spoke about the silence, about the slow withdrawal that she had interpreted as rejection and responded to with her own withdrawal, creating a feedback loop that neither of them could see from the inside. Dr. Weston nodded. "And Elliot?" I built a wall around the hardest year of my life and told myself I was protecting her from it. I wasn't. I was protecting myself from the vulnerability of needing help. Dr. Weston wrote something down. That's an unusually precise insight for a first session. I've had 2.5 years to think about it. I just couldn't say it until now. Then the room shifted. "There's something I haven't told Nadira yet," he said. Nadira went still. 6 months ago, I was offered a partnership at the firm. Full equity. My name on the letterhead. It's what I've worked toward for 14 years. He paused. I turned it down. The partnership required relocating to the firm's new office in Denver for 2 years to establish the regional practice. 2 years away. Nadira stared at him. The expression that crossed her face was not one emotion. It was several arriving simultaneously, the way a building responds to an earthquake, multiple systems stressed at once. You turned it down, she said. Not a question. We were already disappearing from each other under the same roof. I wasn't going to find out what we became with 1,500 miles between us. You gave that up. For us. Without telling me. I didn't want it to feel like a debt. I made a decision I could live with. Dr. Weston leaned forward slightly. Elliot, do you see a pattern in that? Making significant sacrifices in silence and assuming the act itself is sufficient communication? He was quiet for a long time. Yes, he said finally. I do. And Nadira, do you recognize what that pattern might look like from the outside to someone who doesn't know the sacrifice was made? It looks like indifference, Nadira said softly. It looks like someone who doesn't care enough to include you in the decision. The room held that truth. Then Nadira's phone buzzed on the cushion beside her. She glanced down. Her expression tightened. She turned the screen toward Elliot without a word. A text from Marcus Webb. Thinking about you. You deserve a man who shows up, not one who disappears. Elliot read it with the same unhurried attention he gave load calculations. Then, to the surprise of everyone in the room, he set the phone down gently and looked at Marcus Webb's words the way he looked at decorative facades on buildings. Surfaces designed to look structural, but incapable of bearing any real weight. That's not a competition I participate in, he said quietly. I don't compete with people who only show up when something looks broken. I restore. He looked at Nadira with a steadiness that contained no performance, no bravado, no anger, just clarity. And I'm not done restoring this. Nadira closed her eyes. A single tear traced the curve of her cheek. She did not wipe it away. They left Dr. Weston's office into a cold, bright November afternoon. The wind off the lake carried the first real bite of approaching winter. They walked to the car without holding hands. It was too early for that particular ease, but their shoulders nearly touched, and neither moved away. In the car, Nadira said, "He won't stop texting." No, he won't. Does that worry you? Elliot started the engine. Not even a little. But Marcus Webb's next appearance, public, deliberate, designed for maximum impact, would force Nadira to say something she did not know she was ready to say until the words were already leaving her mouth. The annual benefit gala for the Chicago Architecture Foundation was held at the Art Institute in the Modern Wings Griffin Court, a soaring glass and steel space that Elliot loved for the same reason he loved any honest structure. It hid nothing. The engineering was the aesthetic, the bones were the beauty. Elliot wore charcoal. Nadira wore deep burgundy. Simple, deliberate, entirely herself. When they walked in together and Elliot's hand found the small of her back as they crossed the threshold, she leaned into it, barely. The smallest possible gesture of return. He noticed. Marcus Webb arrived at 8:30. Dark suit, rented watch. Elliot clocked the brand and the newness of the leather strap with quiet, private precision. The way an architect notices a renovation that is trying too hard. Marcus moved through the room with the calibrated energy of a man who needed the environment to confirm his significance in order to feel it. At 9 o'clock, Marcus found Nadira near the bar. Elliot was across the room in conversation with a colleague from the Landmarks Commission, but he had a clear line of sight. He watched Marcus approach, the practiced lean, the smile that said, "I understand you better than the person you came with." Nadira set her glass down, her posture straightened, not dramatically, not for show, with the quiet alignment of a woman who has already done her reckoning and arrived somewhere solid. She looked at Marcus Webb the way a person looks at a chapter they have read, understood, and closed. Her voice carried just far enough, not performed, simply clear. I already have a man who builds foundations, not promises, foundations. And I'm standing on one right now. A brief silence rippled through the nearby conversations, the natural pause that occurs in a crowded room when something true is said without performance or apology. Marcus blinked. His rehearsed expression faltered, briefly, microscopically, before the recovery came. But the recovery itself told the story. He had expected a different outcome. Her refusal landed on him like a language he had no framework to process. He produced a sound that was not quite a laugh, pivoted toward the bar, and was absorbed into the crowd. Elliot, across the room, had watched the entire exchange. He did not cross the floor, did not intervene, did not make it a moment about himself. He simply watched Marcus Webb's retreating figure with the calm assessment of a man who has spent 2 decades distinguishing between what is structural and what is decorative, and smiled, quietly, the private smile of a man who understands the difference between what holds and what merely appears to. Later that night, after the gala and the drive home up Lake Shore, the city's skyline reflected in the dark water to their right, Elliot took a different exit. Nadira noticed, but said nothing. He drove to the Englewood Community Center, the project she had heard about from a stranger at a dinner party, the one he had spent 11 months building without ever mentioning it at home. He parked at the curb. The building was finished now. Warm light glowed from the windows of the after-hours study hall. Through the glass, a teenager sat at a long table with headphones on, doing homework. A small child traced letters on a whiteboard while a volunteer watched. "I never told you about this place," Elliot said quietly, "because I didn't think building it was worth mentioning. I just saw a space that wasn't working, and I knew how to fix it." He turned to look at her. "But I think I was building this because I didn't know how to build what we needed. It was easier to fix a community center for strangers than to walk into our living room and say, 'I'm lost and I need you to help me find my way back.'" Nadira looked at the building, at the light in the windows, at the small child tracing letters, the foundational act of finding language, the exact work she had devoted her life to. "You built something that helps children find their words," she said softly. "And you couldn't find yours." "No," he said. "I couldn't." She took his hand, not tentatively, fully, the grip of a person who has made a decision. "Then we find them together," she said. 5 months later, on a warm Saturday in April, Elliot and Nadira Granger moved back into the same bedroom. Not symbolically, practically. They rearranged the furniture together. Nadira insisted the reading chair go by the window. Elliot insisted the drafting table go in the corner, not in a separate room. She agreed, on the condition that he talked to her while he worked. They had been seeing Dr. Weston every other week. The sessions had not been easy. Healing, as Elliot now understood it, was not a renovation. It was not a matter of stripping a structure back to its good bones and rebuilding. It was more like seismic retrofitting. You had to learn how the building moved under stress and design new systems that allowed for movement without collapse. They had learned to say the difficult things in real time before silence could calcify around them. Nadira left short notes on his drafting table when she left early for the hospital. Simple, specific. "Proud of you for the Oak Park project. Come home by 7. I made something." He kept every single one. Elliot began saying out loud the things he had previously assumed she knew, that her Friday dinners meant more to him than she understood, that he had declined the partnership for them, that the sound of her laugh, the real one, the one that reached her eyes, was the single most important indicator he had that the structure of their life was sound. On the evening they finished rearranging the bedroom, they stood at the window looking out over the neighborhood. Late April light coming in gold and copper through the old oaks. The brownstones of Lincoln Park, glowing in a way they only glow when you are looking at them from inside a home that feels, for the first time in years, like a home. Nadira's phone buzzed. She glanced down. A text from Marcus Webb, "One final time. Last chance. You know where to find me." Nadira read it once. She did not show it to Elliot first, did not announce it, did not ask what to do. She blocked the number quietly, without ceremony, the way a person closes a window when the season has changed and there is no longer any reason to leave it open. Then she handed the phone to him, wordlessly. The particular shorthand of married people who have relearned the language of small gestures. He read the screen, saw the blocked contact, saw the empty thread where nothing more would arrive. He handed it back. No satisfaction, no anger, just the uncomplicated piece of a man too occupied with the life in front of him to spend any energy on what tried to interrupt it. He put his arm around her. She leaned in. They stood that way for a long time, looking at the city they had both always lived in, from a window in a room they had chosen to share again, in a life they had chosen to keep. This story teaches three quiet, practical truths. First, silence is not neutral. In a long marriage, leaving things unsaid is not keeping the peace. It is slowly removing the oxygen from the room. This week, find one thing you have been meaning to say to someone you love. Say it plainly before Friday, not in a letter, not in your head. Out loud. Second, expertise can become a blind spot. An architect who could read the structural history of any building could not read the signals in his own home. A speech therapist who helped children find language every day could not find any for her husband. The skills that define us professionally can become the exact shape of what we miss personally. Pay attention to the places where your competence ends and your vulnerability begins. Third, the people who restore patiently will always outlast the people who only show up when something looks broken. A man who stays, who works, who chooses you on ordinary days when choosing is not romantic but simply necessary. That man is worth more than any well-timed stranger with a better pitch. Real love is not a feeling that sustains itself. It is a decision remade daily, in the small, specific, unsexy details of a shared life. This story was crafted from a human heart with gentle support from AI. Its only purpose is to remind you that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not to leave, but to knock on a door in their own house and say three honest words. Can we talk?